Welcome to the Sports Card Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Big Ken. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a streaming service, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You'll be notified whenever I drop any new content. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Super excited for today's episode. Someone I've been talking with for a while about getting him on the pod, and happy today is finally the day. Today he's here. Please welcome Jonathan, aka Basketball Card Guy. Jonathan, welcome and thanks for being here.
How's it going? Good to see you, Ken. Glad to finally be on. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah. I mean, we see each other now. We start to see each other at all the shows now, right?
Pretty much.
Out and about.
Mohegan, Trumbull, any show in Connecticut, I feel like I run into you at. So.
Yeah. Well, I first met you. I don't know if you remember. I met you at the Basketball Hall of Fame. We were on a panel. We did a panel up there before the trade night at the Basketball Hall of Fame, and I remember talking with you afterwards, and just listening to your long list, your deep resume of all the things and all the things you do in the hobby and outside the hobby and media, and I was like, oh my God, music, right? I was like, oh my God, how have I never heard of this guy before? And now it's,
you've seen the work. You just didn't know it was me behind it.
I didn't know it was you behind it. Yeah. So, we'll start first. The name, right? Basketball Card Guy is genius.
Thank you.
When you really think about it, and I'm sure, the hobby gave you that name. It's not like you had to. So most of us coming up with our Instagram and our this and our that, we're like, oh, what's it going to be? What's going to be so cool? And you're probably like, well, everybody calls me the Basketball Card Guy. So how can I go wrong?
No, it's totally true. So when I started my Instagram back in 2014, I think my original name was NBA Trader. So I was trading NBA cards, and I started using that name. I made a banner. I set up at shows in Connecticut with it. And I just started to worry. I'm like, what if the NBA gets mad at me for using NBA?
That. I'm like, did they ever come calling? And
no, I wasn't like a big fish at all. People knew me that had known me for years collecting, but like I wasn't in any kind of big circles at that point. And so I just thought, you know what? Maybe I don't need to knock on their door that way. Let's not push my luck. Let me come up with a different name. And it's exactly what you said, Ken. Like literally everyone at these shows that were seeing my booth, they all called me the Basketball Card Guy. And the reason for that, not only am I passionate about basketball card collecting, if you know me, but the thing that was just so apparent from minute one of coming to my booth was I did not have a single card that wasn't a basketball card. Every other person, this going to shows, every other person in a show is going to have a variety. Basically, because that's traditionally smart. Like having a variety is good. Diversification is good. And a lot of people like a lot of different sports and different players and different things. So when you came to my booth, you literally only saw basketball cards. So it was almost a derogatory kind of like term for a while. People were like, oh, there's that idiot, the basketball card guy. Only got basketball cards. What a moron. Like that's how it was almost treated. But I took it on. I said, that is what I am. This is what I collect. This is what I love. And that's why that's all I have.
Yeah. And that was it. There was never any other sport from day one. It was basketball.
Yeah. At the shows, that's all I ever set up with. I collect like some celebrity stuff. Like this whole case here is like celebrity autographs and things like that. I've collected that kind of stuff for years. I'll collect the GOATs, like I have a Tom Brady autograph. I've got a Wayne Gretzky autograph. I've got a bunch of Derek Jeter stuff now after working with Arena Club. Like I do like collect other things outside. But when it comes to like the shows and my kind of outward brand, it's all basketball.
So. Yeah, that's great. I feel whenever I see now that I know you, I see photos or videos of at celebrity signings or these intimate meet and greets with professional athletes, or even courtside stuff. I always see there you are. You're in somebody else's picture all the time. So I asked the question, and I know this from following you on Instagram. how does that 14-year-old kid working at the LCS in Mount Kisco, New York, end
Yes.
up in such small circles? Just talk to me a little bit about that journey.
You just keep doing what you love. I know the phrase, keep doing what you love. You don't work a day in your life if that's what you're doing. And it's true. And the hobby has been a part of my life since I was that kid, since even before that, since my dad gave me baseball cards when I was 8 or 9 years old. He gave me his collection with some Mantles and Gehrig's and, all these legends in baseball. They didn't resonate with me for their playing because I never saw Mickey Mantle play, but they resonated with me because they were cool, they were collectible. My dad loved them when he was growing up. And so when I found out that I could have basketball cards, like the same kind of things that he was collecting about his favorite sport, I could do with mine, it was amazing. And so starting there and just continuing and not stopping, like a lot of folks talk about they took the break, for 20 years or, kind of put this stuff away. I never did. I got enjoyment out of it from the moment I started to today. When I get something in the mail or I find something at a show, I get excited about it, like it's a highlight of my day. So I think it's just authenticity. I think that over the years, when I started in that store, actually, a friend of mine and I both went in. We had seen the store on day one, it opened, and they were looking to hire. They asked both of us to come back the next week to come in and start the job. My friend skipped out on it, decided he didn't really want to, pop in that day, and I showed up. So I ended up night managing at that store for like 3 years, and having the responsibilities. I never took home a paycheck. I spent every last cent in the store,
Mm.
but I got a lot of experience. I got to learn a lot about the industry. I got to see how the distributors worked even back then, which were a lot smaller than they are now in terms of
Yeah.
like we didn't have the GTSs and the Southern Hobbies that store was interacting with. They were, really working with local guys who were buying directly from, Upper Deck and Fleer and stuff like that and getting it out.
Mhm.
So it's just about doing it, and it's about doing everything you do in a quality way. I don't half-ass anything.
Mhm.
Um, People that look years back, I did a big April Fool's joke called Grading Company. You can still see the website gradingco.com, gradingco.com. And I came up with my own grading company on April Fool's Day, claimed that you could scan cards with your phone to get the grades, and then you could self encapsulate said cards by putting them in this interesting patent pending sleeve and then putting it in boiling hot water. Um, Believe it or not, a lot of people thought it was real. I had about 1,000 people sign up wanting advanced access to this new profound grading. Claimed it was made out of a space grade resin, that it was bulletproof, all sorts of stuff that was just crazy, over the top, unnecessary. But I built the website. I worked with Darren Rovell to do an interview. We did a video interview on the release of it. The timing was perfect. PSA shut down like 2 or 3 days before this came out, before April Fool's Day. So it looked like it could totally be real. Like this new
Yeah.
grading company opens it. You don't have to mail your cards anywhere, which has always been my thing. Like that's probably the single thing that holds me back from grading is that I don't want to let go of my prized possessions,
Yeah.
especially not to the mail and having it shipped back and
Yeah.
forth. I just feel like something's going to happen. So
Yeah.
this kind of took all of the things that were amazing and I really would love, like I dreamed about having in a card grading company, and it put it all together in one and then wrapped it around in a joke, like boiling your cards. No one's going to do that. It's
Mm.
ridiculous. Um, but it went around the internet. Darren shared it on his Twitter to his 2 million followers. We had 40,000 people, visiting the website that I made in that one day. You think about like how crazy that is. But people still, I met someone at Bleecker Trading a week ago who said, you know what I really love? Oh man, I still think that was that grading company thing you did years ago. This person I met for the first time is bringing that up,
Yep.
still.
Yep.
So if you do everything in a quality way, I always say like people recognize it. And even though that was a joke, there were a number of people that reached out to me at that point, investors. There was millions of dollars of investment capital on the table for that company before people realized it wasn't actually real. But it was like crazy. But those folks have come back to me and said, look, we want to work with you on other things. Like if you
Yeah.
can market something that well, you demonstrated your ability in this joke that you could do things in reality that would really help our real companies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
put your best foot
Bring
forward every day. You never
bringing
know who's
the
watching.
views, bringing the Yeah, views and bringing people in. Sure, I
Yeah.
people probably tripping over themselves to get you onto the marketing and media.
And that's that's my sweet spot, a lot of that stuff. And, I joined a group early on in its existence. I joined a company called Knox, Noxx, which about a year later actually sold to Beckett. And that was my introduction into Beckett as well, as that the sale of that company. But Knox is a collection management tool. It's going to have a new kind of release as Beckett Collect shortly, hopefully soon. They're integrating a lot of the Beckett data now into it. But I came on as the chief collecting officer. I was the chief collector there. I was the guy that, knew about collecting, but also knew about technology and also knew about marketing. So when we're talking about building out the product, I was the guy that was always able to raise the hand and say, hey, wait, we have to think about this because this is how a collector is going to use it.
Yep.
For folks that have been in a startup before, for folks that have just dealt with anyone that builds a website or technology, or you work with people overseas on any of that stuff, um, you can very easily take it for granted. Like they may be a great coder, the person you're working with, they can do code expertly, but if they don't understand the product, they don't understand what it is that thing's going to do or the audience it's going to serve,
Yep.
you lose it all. It doesn't work.
Yep.
And so that was my role there, was just really keeping things geared around like what is the end product, who are the people we're serving. And so, like I said, a lot of these things, one thing leads to another. You put your best foot forward. You make sure that every piece is a portfolio piece, everything you do. And so when people say, "Hey, who did that?" and it
Yeah.
points back to me, so.
Yep. Yep. Nothing half-assed, right?
Exactly right.
Yep.
Yep.
So I know you work with a bunch of other companies working on different things that are in the hobby. Who are you working with now? What kind of things you doing? Anything like you just talked about Beckett coming out with some stuff. Anything else that we can kind of look forward to?
I've been working a lot with Arena Club, and so they are a combination grading marketplace vaulting service. They've got some revolutionary things in terms of the grading. They use AI and human grading combined. And so when you look at the grading report, it's going beyond where kind of Beckett established decades ago this notion of subgrades, that you can
Mhm.
see the four main subgrades, the four things that go into the grade of your card. Arena Club's taking a step further. They have heat maps on the card itself to show you exactly where there are issues, where there are flaws. So if the card gets a 9 as a surface subgrade, with Beckett, you wonder, okay, well, why did it get that? I know it's a
Where was the
9.
deficiency?
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. And with
Yeah.
Arena Club, you go on and you can click on surface as that 9 subgrade, and it will highlight the area or areas on the card that have the issue. So you can
Mm.
zoom right, and you can zoom right, and you can pinch zoom on your phone and see, oh yeah, there is a little tiny dot there or a little scratch. Some people might be angered by it because it's like, well, it's so finicky. Like, why are you guys looking at such a tiny little thing and deducting? But you know what? It's full transparency. At least you're seeing why it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. They've done a lot on that, and now they've got their own things called slab packs, which is their kind of answer to repacks, where they're taking a whole slew of cards. They're showing you the totality of what you can get in a repack product. And then you can buy a repack that either has like 2, 3, or 5 cards, I believe, in each pack. But you see the 100 cards you can pull out of that 2-card pack. You see them
Mhm.
all before you buy it. And so you can look at it, make an educated decision. Well, would I be happy with any two of these? Is what I would ask myself. Like
Yep.
look down at the bottom tier. Like if I got these two, would I be happy with spending, the $50 on that? Would that be okay?
Mhm.
So you get to see that. And as cards are pulled, they're removed, and then new ones come in and replace them in that thing. So if you look right now and you go, no, there's nothing that really interests me, you can come
Mm.
back 3 hours later and now there is. So it's
Yep.
kind of always moving, but always transparent. I love that fact.
Mm.
The other thing that's kind of neat is they're doing something that I've long said. They're doing redemptions, and redemptions, as we know in the hobby, is a very bad word. And I tell people, like I even told them when they first started, I'm like, you might not want to call it redemptions because people don't like redemptions. But they're doing redemptions exactly the way that I've always said they should be done, and that's if you get a redemption, it's not because the card didn't have a chance to be signed and it's kind of a lazy way of just, oh, here, redeem it later. Maybe 3 years from now, we'll mail it to you. No, no, no. It's for something that doesn't fit in a pack. That's where I think redemption should go.
Yeah.
It makes me think back to like Fleer, the Diamond Ink points back in the late 90s. You collected 500 points, you mailed it into Fleer, they sent you an autographed mini basketball. I have a bunch of them on the other side of this wall. That was one of my favorite things. I have one of the Kobe's actually from that set too. Like, just
Wow.
incredible, right? Like, you could get an autographed ball from Kobe Bryant. It doesn't fit in the pack, but you got it because of the pack.
Yep.
Love that idea, and that's what
Yeah.
Arena Club's doing now as well. I think they just announced that their latest slab pack that's gonna be coming out, there's a chance at a Michael Jordan autographed shoe. I mean, like, where else are you gonna get that in
Wow.
a pack of cards? Like a
Yeah.
full-size shoe autographed by Jordan. Like,
Yeah.
amazing. So and they've of course, they
I guess
have
that I guess if that was in the pack, we'd know which pack it was in, right?
yeah,
No
right.
need to weigh it
Totally.
or fondle it at all, right? We know
Yeah, like,
exactly which
what is
one.
this? Totally. But they gave away a trip to the Super Bowl in a pack. They've been giving away Jeter autograph stuff. They're really looking at it as that this pack is not just a way to get cards, but it's a way to let you have greater experiences, whether it be like physically going somewhere and having that experience or getting a really great piece of memorabilia that you're going to love in your collection. So it's just awesome. It's just awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you talked we talked a little bit before. You had mentioned you're doing some work with the National. Talk to me
Yes,
about that a
yes.
little bit.
So they reach out. I had done a bunch of work in the past nationals with booth design. I did some stuff with Beckett. I did their video screens a couple of years ago. If people remember, back in Chicago when actually no, back in Atlantic City was that one when they had these huge 20-foot by 10-foot video walls. So I did all of the programming behind that, like creating that visual that was going on 24/7 there. And then of course I work with Roadshow Cards. I'm their branding manager. I have been since the company started. Actually created the brand here in Connecticut. Jimmy from Kentucky actually flew up. We created it in my office. And so I designed out their booth last year at the National, which is a really cool experience as well. You could see all four of their stores. They got a store in New York, they have a store in Kentucky, one in Dallas, and one in California. And it's the one time, the way I designed this, I said, I want it to be the one time a year that you're in walking distance of all the stores. You can literally walk from one to another, and you have that experience within. So it was this big kind of circle in the center, and that created this kind of square that you could walk to each store. You see a video screen that lets you into the store to see it, a showcase in front, and then the people that manage the stores right in front. So you literally were feeling like you were in it.
Yeah.
And so the folks at the National, they very swift at what they do, right? So they did surveys, they did things, they had people going around doing research. They handed out these sheets at
Yeah.
the last National and the ones before that, I'm assuming as well, asking like, what do you think of the booth? Does it achieve the goals that it's looking for? Does this really promote well, especially in the corporate section? They really want to see, they want to create an uplifting experience.
Yeah.
And so what they told me was a lot of these ones where they saw something that they really liked, it was a booth that I was involved with, something that I had done. And so they said this year they reached out and they said, look, we want to create a cool lobby experience for this year's National in Cleveland. And we'd love you to be a part of that. And so I flew out to Cleveland with the management team last week, saw the whole space. It's actually a really nice venue, really tall ceilings, beautiful layout. It's much more of a boxy layout than Chicago was. So one thing that drives me nuts about Chicago, I love Chicago. I love the location. I love the
Yeah.
fact that the hotels are there,
Yeah.
but the venue, how much they've expanded throughout, it's just
Yeah.
very hard to figure out where you are.
Yeah.
It's
You're
kind of
always
like
lost.
yeah,
Always
right?
lost
Like,
in there.
you walk
Yeah.
in this door, and then somehow you come out this door, and you're like, "How did that happen? How do I go from there and then
Yeah.
end up over here?" Like, it's strange.
And the numbers up top, that's what I remember last year about Chicago, those banners hanging. It's like, okay, so if that number is there and I'm looking for this, it should be that way. And I get down there and,
And it's
and I'm like
not.
10,000 numbers different. And I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? How did I get here? Yeah.
Exactly. So that gets solved with having a space that's much more of a rectangle, which is what Cleveland is. So I think a lot of people will be happy about that. It
Yeah.
is a little bit smaller of a venue though than Chicago was when you combined out all of those other spaces in Chicago. So there will
Mhm.
be less tables overall, but I think that the experience is going to be heightened. I really like the venue. I really like the look of it
Mhm.
there. And so, yeah, I'm in the planning stages with them now. I got to see the space, got to meet with some of the corporates that were there as well, and just trying to plan out that experience to really kind of, bring it in from the moment you walk in the door, just feeling like, yes, this is the show that people come to from all around the world every year. This is the one that
Yeah,
they care about, and just making
yeah,
people feel that.
yeah, and you wanna make it spectacular, right? I mean, as over the top as you possibly can, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
How many years have you been going to the National?
It's
When did you
almost
start?
10 now. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
skipped a couple in the middle, but I've been going for about 10 years now. I think the first national
mhm.
was almost 10 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. So
And was it always as a spectator? Did you ever set up?
I never set up. I never set
Yeah.
up. It's hard to break through. And that's one of the things that I think that and we'll see what happens, right? We'll see what happens because we had this insane inflow, of people in the last few years that I think have made it harder. And they've expanded like the Chicago venue, they never used that much space of it before. So like
Yeah.
we're really looking at some of the biggest square footage spaces
Mhm.
that the
Yeah.
Nationals ever had. And the other piece too to realize that when Cleveland was booked, when this venue was booked, because a lot of people are asking like why would you move from a space that's larger last year to a space that's smaller this year when there was so much demand last year? Like people that wanted a table couldn't even get a table last year. Why would you move to a smaller venue? People don't realize like they book these venues so far in advance, like 3 years in advance. So Cleveland was booked before the boom.
Yeah.
So, and now in the next 3 years, looking at the following year and then the 2 years after that, we're going to be in Chicago. The National will be
Mhm.
back in Chicago for 3 years straight.
Yep.
Based on that last vote that was made, they go back and they do Chicago every other year, but the middle year now was voted to be in Chicago as well by all the folks that
Yeah.
were getting their tables. So,
And interestingly enough, if you took a whole other Chicago, right, the whole size, and you put it right next to that one, right, and you opened up some door there, you'd sell all those tables out too, right?
you
There'd probably
would.
still be a waiting list.
Yeah, it's just such an enormity, and talking with the guys that run this show now, it's amazing because, like, again, I don't think people throw stuff out there. You got Culture Collision coming up, obviously. You're going to that, right? You're headed up?
I am.
So,
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna be there, but like, what an incredible looking show, but you hear people asking about Atlanta, like, "Why isn't it in Atlanta? Why isn't it in Las Vegas? Why can't we get it in California?" And in a lot of cases, they just don't have venues that are large enough to
Yep.
hold it. And then the second part of it in an organizational stance is that we I mean, this is the biggest thing in sports conventions for sure. But we are not the biggest thing in conventions. Like I've worked in media for years. NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, is the largest broadcast event. It happens once a year. It happens in Las Vegas, and it happens at their gigantic. It takes over the entire Las Vegas Convention Center, which is like a mile long.
Yeah.
That venue is all sorts of different buildings, and the National wants to be in one contiguous space. Las Vegas doesn't have, as big as Vegas is, like, doesn't have a contiguous space that can really do what the National wants. And these other cities that people talk about, like, "Let's go to California," or "Let's go over here." Same deal. They don't have a
Yeah.
space that's large enough to contain everything that needs to go on.
Yeah. Yeah, because
There's the VIP.
that would
Yeah.
just be really overkill for any city, right? You think of a
Yeah.
space that big, who's gonna be filling it besides, like, this once a year
Right.
type of
Once a
thing?
year, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other piece of it is these shows, like the NABs and those kinds of things, they come back to the same spot every single year. And so that venue can put in place a 5 or 10-year contract, and that's what they wanna do. They don't wanna hear, "Oh, we're gonna come to Cleveland this year, and then maybe we'll come back to Cleveland in 4 or 5 years." They're not
Mhm.
gonna get any sort of priority booking in a venue if they're not giving that commitment year after year. Because most of
Yep.
these other shows, they're in the same place every year, and that gives you a lot of leverage in booking that.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's the thing too, like, when people are like, Yeah, in the ideal world, it'd be great if this thing toured, and it would be great if there was a giant venue in each town that they could do it in." I mean, I've said for years, Jacob Javits Center in New York City, talk about that's where they do New York Comic Con, that's where they
Yep.
do the New York Auto Show. That's an awesome venue, but again, It's got different floors. It's not the same kind of space. It's not what the national guys are really looking for an experience. So it really
Yeah.
limits, something that big. And then this year, um, there's a VIP space. If you have a VIP badge, there's a VIP space. And I don't know, we're still looking at like how it's going to be cordoned off or if it's going to be the full space, but there's a 50,000 square foot space for just the VIPs to have during the day. Like while you're at the show, if you have a VIP badge, you can pop down there and relax, trade with someone, meet up with somebody. Like that's crazy to think about. Like, but again, that's on top of the show floor. Like that's an extra 50,000 square feet
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Like,
And
so
is that in that continuous space, or that's like
that's on a separate
upstairs?
floor. That space is on a separate floor, but it's in the same building. So,
Yeah.
like, it's convenient for those folks, but it's not kind of giving, like, different priority to vendors. It's like, we're not
Yeah.
throwing some vendors in the basement then, right? Like, that's not what it feels like.
Yeah.
If you had done that, you're keeping
Yeah.
everybody on the same floor in that same space.
Yeah.
So,
Even playing
um
field.
yeah,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of those things that go into that planning, and there's
Mm.
just a lot of constraints.
Yeah.
But this year I think it's going to be awesome. I love seeing on that. I hope I'm not giving too much away on any of this stuff. I'm not trying to speak out of school at all, but I see on the map this year there are food trucks, which is exciting for me. In the building, like there's going to be a lot, and it looks like a nice variety of food right there on site, which I think
Mm.
is something that people only think about when they're in the middle of it and you've been at the show for 8 hours and you haven't eaten yet. And you're like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, why do I need to leave? I don't want to take an Uber to go get something to eat. Like,
Yeah.
it'd
Yeah.
be great if they had some nice food, and it looks like they will. So,
Yeah.
a lot of
And
cool stuff.
like
Yeah.
last year, if you wanted a coffee, I mean, you're like, when I showed up in Chicago, I'm like, oh wow, there's a Starbucks inside. I can get a
Inside.
coffee
Yeah.
every day, right? And then the
Yep.
next day I show up and there's like 100,000 people in line for a coffee. I'm like,
It's true.
oh no, no,
Yeah.
I
It's always
had to
about
leave.
having enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to leave. I had to walk a couple blocks to a hotel, buy a coffee, and come back because the
I,
show was going to start and I needed to be set up. Yeah.
I just remember trying to get chicken tenders last year at one of the commissary things that they had there. And I went up and there's this long line and people are just shaking their heads on the line. I'm like, this is going to take a while. There were two people at the cashier's spot, these two women, they were sitting there, and the chef slams something down and goes, that's it. He takes off his apron and he walks or quickly out of the space. And I turned to the two girls and they said, you might want to find another place to eat. I don't think he's coming back. And I'm like, is there anyone else back there? And they're like, nope.
Oh well,
What? Like,
that was it. Yeah.
that's it. And then you got to walk half a mile to go find another place to eat. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. So I think everything that I've seen so far, and again, it took one trip with these guys to see it, to check it out. It looks really cool. The
Yeah.
space is neat. I think they're doing a great job, putting it together. It is a new management team this year, but these are guys that have done great shows. They're responsible for the New York shows, the White Plains. They're
Yep.
responsible for the Philly show, the Chantilly show. So they've got a lot of show experience. So I think they're bringing a kind of a new flavor to it
Mhm.
as well. But yeah, I'm very excited for
Yeah.
that this year.
Yeah, we did a trade night last year in Chicago, and I know this year we'd been talking about it, but they said we're gonna be holding our own. There's another,
Yes,
and it may be that VIP room, it may be somewhere else,
yep,
but they're saying that they have a space designated
they
to be
do.
holding trade nights
And
there. So
and I was one of the guys that helped organize the trade nights for the last 2 years, the official ones with the National. Another thing
mhm.
I worked on. Roadshow cards, along with Card Collector 2, have been the kind of official trade night for the last few years. We did it really big last year. We had a ballroom that was upstairs in the same building as the National in Chicago. Um, 38,000 square feet that room was. It was
Wow.
crazy. Tall ceilings. I think we had over 6,000 people in the room at one time, and then another 2,000 or so outside. There was a big lobby that filled up as well. We gave out over 2,000 free T-shirts with the Trade Night logo that I'd done. I did the branding for that as well, and it was a great experience. This year, it's going to be in it, and maybe more than one night. Hint, hint. Might not just be one night anymore that they're doing, without saying too much.
Yep.
But definitely seeing like what we can do there, and with that past experience, like I think there's a lot that can be done. So
Yeah. Nice. I'm looking forward to it. Have it, it's here it is January, right? And we're excited. Like nobody wants to mention it too early, but here it is January and we're already excited. Yeah.
they start planning it the day after the other one ends. I actually even
Mhm.
before that, but I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
and I feel like that we talk about that. It's kind of like Christmas, right? You lead up to the holiday, you get excited for the holiday, and then as soon as it stops, like the kids are thinking again, well, I got to be on my best behavior because Santa might bring me a good gift next year. Like
Yeah. I
that's what the
I
national feels like. Yeah,
I'll tell you what, this last year I stayed to the very end, right? We had a booth and we had to stay and we were backing the trucks we were loading up pallets because we had our stuff shipped out there. So
yep,
I stayed to the very end, right? So I'm sitting there with my guy Carmine, at Carmine's Cards, and we're watching and the lights go out. I mean, it ends, the lights go out, the doors open up, trucks just start driving in on the floor and there's just banging and stuff, just stuff is being torn down. Like, when they put it up, it must have been put it up so neatly. And then
yeah.
we were right across from Beckett, where the guy was just grabbing these boards and just taking the boards and just throwing them on the ground. I was like getting depressed. Like I was just sitting there watching
Right.
this whole thing come down and just realize that's it. It's over, and we have to wait
It's sad.
a whole
Yeah,
year till next year
you,
for the excitement for this to happen again.
you just did it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just clearly remember that moment. I was like, probably one of the few times I was really sad in the hobby, watching something come to an end.
Watching them, yeah, compress it down. I'm seeing if I can find a video on my phone because I thought this part was interesting and doesn't give like anything away. Um, this is the backstage area, which is immense. Where this is the backstage area in Cleveland, where they're gonna have staging and other trucks. This is not part of the show floor. Like,
Oh,
take that in, how big that is.
yeah, yeah,
Like, it is ginormous. So it's gonna make it easy for both the corporates and other folks to be able to load in and load out because 'cause you've got this
mm,
kinda staging zone, there that's built in that's not even part of the floor, not even part of the whole
yeah,
square footage
yeah,
that's calculated out.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's sad, like, when it ends. Um, and I think, like, for me, and I know it's the same for you, it's that it's not just the cards, which I mean, there's incredible stuff. Like if you're looking for something in particular, this is the one room you're gonna find it in throughout the
yep,
year. I mean, like your best odds. But it's the people. I go to this to meet up with folks, hang out for the dinners, for the things like, and I wish there were more nights, honestly, because it's just like I want to go out to dinner with so many different people, and I
mm,
want to have
yeah,
those experiences there, and everyone's going to be there,
yep,
and that's the best part,
yep,
is really those interactions. I feel like, and seeing collections. I've done some of my biggest trades of all time at that show, where we planned them out ahead of time, but rather than mailing stuff in the mail, let's do this in person.
yeah, yeah,
Let's come out
yep,
there and make it happen there, and that's
mm,
just so much cooler, so much
yep.
cooler.
Yeah, and I know you just talked about mailing cards, right? So it's so much nicer, especially if it's a big trade, just to go and you want to see, touch, feel. You don't want to drop those cards in the mail, especially if it's you know when you're doing a deal with somebody else. It's like, and I still do this, and I buy a big card, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take your word now. You've sent me 35 pictures, front, backs,
Right,
corners,
you actually have
far
it.
away, close up. Now I'm going to take your word for it, and I'm nervous the whole time I'm waiting. I'm watching tracking, showing this thing showing up. So yeah, I know what you mean. Like if you could do a deal in person, like meet up with somebody somewhere, it's
Yeah, and you get to see the condition. I buy so much stuff raw, as you can tell by the back. Like most of
yeah,
my cards are raw. That becomes an awkward point too. Like I tend to trust people way too much, and so while I am very good about like notating condition issues, all sorts of things on the cards that I have, I take it for granted that a lot of people aren't. And that a lot of folks, like when they see my case at shows, they look at it and they see all these raw cards and they go, "Are these all grading rejects?" It's like, no, they've been in my collection all this time raw because I
yeah,
don't see the
yeah,
point in grading it. I
mm,
can look with my own two eyes and see that the card is in great condition.
yeah,
But I oftentimes forget that that's what other people do. They grade cards, they break them out, they're grading rejects, and that's why they're trying to sell them raw. And it sucks because I like buying raw cards. So going to a show, that's the one opportunity where I can really do that because I can examine the
Mm,
card and go, yeah, this guy just didn't want to grade it like me. I don't want to grade
mm,
the cards. It's not the thing
yeah.
I do with them. I like
But
keeping
if
them.
you're not grading the card, right? And
Yeah,
I know you've been doing this for many years, and you can look at a card, and is there a part of the card, like, do you pick up the card and say, well, I could see the dings on the corner, but the centering is great, so I love the card, or the corners are perfect and the edges are
yeah.
perfect, but the centering's not there,
Centering's
like
the A number one for me. That's the one that has to be.
so that's a reject. I'll put that one back. If the centering's
Yep.
off, I can't. All right, yeah.
Eye
So
appeal is huge. Eye appeal. I saw a card the other night actually that was a PSA 1 Jordan rookie. Perfect centering, perfect corners, perfect edges, great color. Okay, so what's wrong? Why is it a 1? Had a pinhole. Someone stuck it on a on a
oh
board. I would take that card over a lot of other cards,
yeah,
because I don't see the pinhole. Like, looking at the card, if you look at the card in front of you, like, look at this card, you're like, if you look at the card in front of you, what comes out to you, it looked perfect, looked like a perfect card. If you covered
yeah,
up the grade and you didn't notice the pinhole, obviously, you would assume it was probably an 8 or a 9. Like, you would have
mm,
guessed it was a high grade card.
yeah, yeah.
That to me, centering the things that you can see from afar, like most, and the reason I say that, I guess, is if you look at how my things are displayed, like I work here, like this is my home office, right? So I'll sit here and during the day I'll glance over at the cards. This is how far away I am. Centering, I can tell from this far away. A little edge issue or a little corner issue,
Yeah,
I can't.
or a pinhole.
So
Yeah,
I will
mm,
always prioritize towards centering because in my enjoyment of the cards, that's the thing I would notice first.
yeah, yeah. So you're setting up now. Now you used to set up. You took time off, right? Now you're starting to set up now again. Um, what what kind of challenges, like from when you used to do it to now? What kind of challenge do you, like new
That's a great
challenges? Are
question.
they the same old challenges? Are there new ones now?
The single greatest challenge is the obsession with comps. And it sounds funny, but and how much can change in a few years. But between the time I set up, all throughout the 2010s. But I stopped when COVID started. I just said, I don't want to risk it. I don't need to be in person at shows. At the same time, Whatnot, reached out to me very early on. I was one of Loop's very first streaming partners, the first 20 that were on Loop. So I was doing a lot of sales when I wanted to on those platforms really easily and had big audiences. So I didn't need if I needed to sell a card, I didn't need to do it in person. And that's kind of what shifted for me. It's like I can run a story sale now and get out of a bunch of cards that I don't want as much as the other ones that I have pretty
And
quickly.
just to interrupt you, no one can run a story sale like you.
Thank you.
You
I
can make a living just doing people's story sales.
I probably could. But again, it's not a half-assed approach, right? It's a
Yeah,
quality looking experience. A lot of folks, and I appreciate that. A lot of folks reach out to me and there have been some copycats of that now where folks are really upping their game in that. And I applaud that. Like,
yeah,
imitation is the best form of flattery, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
it really, and it helps. I keep my prices in the same location on every slide. So it's very easy to peruse, look through, and be able to see like small things like that help a lot. Um, but yeah, like that. So over the last few years, I turned the corner and said, look, I can do much more online, much more easily. I don't have to cart all of this stuff with me, box it up, worry about losing it on the way, worry about someone stealing it at a show. Like it's much more controlled when I'm just doing it through a story sale or popping it on basketballcardguy.com or any of those things. Like those are digital avenues I can control. The show piece that's so interesting is this obsession with comps. I mean, total obsession. You could have a car. I could have a card that I just bought on eBay last week, and it never came up on eBay for the last 3 years. Like, literally, the one I bought is the only comp. And someone will come up to my booth and say, I'll give you 80% of that comp. Knowing full well the card's numbered out of 5, it's number 4 of 5, it's the exact same card, and I can show them I bought it, and yet they want to pay me 20% of that, 20% off on that. I think it's the strangest thing. And I had to
yeah.
pay for a booth. And I'm like, how does
Yeah.
this work in any
Yep.
sort of, like scalability in the world? And what are they looking to do then with that card?
Mm. Yep.
Um, I've said it's a race to the bottom, this obsession with comps. It reminds me of the 90s. And you may remember this too, where there was a several events that were going on with Beckett, where Beckett's price guide was the way that we all understood what the value of the cards were. But if you went to a show, you would get cards for a percentage off of Beckett. And some booths at like the White Plains, Westchester County show, 50% off book value is what they'd have on a sign. And you go up to their booth, there's a card that's $100 in the latest Beckett, they'd sell it to you for 50. And this was a pattern that went on for a few months where you could buy that $100 card for 50.
Mm.
And unlike the eBay comp world where that now creates a new comp at 50 and then blah, 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 it took a little while for that to like trickle into Beckett. But Beckett was out at shows. Beckett was seeing what things were going for, what they were selling for. Um, and they started lowering the prices on those cards. When people talk about junk wax era and all this kind of stuff and
Yep.
how in the late 90s things went down in value, that was largely because of these things that were happening that were being seen at the shows, and then the book value came down. And now that $100 card that was selling for 50 from that guy, that vendor who probably bought it for 25 because he was telling the person, well, if I'm going to buy it, I'm going to sell it at 50. So, now that card is 50 in the book because Beckett noticed that it was selling at 50 regularly. So they
Yep.
adjusted it. And that same vendor is now doing 50% off of that.
Now
And so
batting
now
out on the
you're,
25.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happened. You probably remember like this was happening, and it was a race to the bottom. It
Yeah.
was, and I see it again now with this comping stuff and these people wanting a percentage off of comps. Like they don't
Mm.
realize that, yeah, sure. I get that you're saying, well, if you're paying 13% in eBay fees, had you sold your exact card on eBay, then you would have only gotten as the vendor 87% of that, like, okay, but
Mm.
uh,
But
you're
but
asking,
on the opposite end of that, the person who bought that card, right, paid taxes and shipping. So if the card's
yep,
$100, and if you're in Connecticut, right, it's
right,
$106.35, and then
plus the
another
shipping,
$5 to ship, you're at
pay
111,
111.
you know,
Now they want to
and
pay you
now
80.
and now somebody wants to give you $80 for that card, right? It's yeah,
Ridiculous.
yeah,
And yet people are doing it. And and the repackers are the ones swooping in and doing this in volume. Someone coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I want to give you 80% of the latest sale on it," is one thing on a single card. It becomes really tempting to a vendor if someone walks up to your table and says, "I'll buy the whole thing at 90%." Now, at a volume play, you feel like, "Oh, that's actually reasonable." Like
yeah,
I don't have to go through the efforts of selling all this stuff over the next several months. If someone's going to take my whole booth and give me 90% of what the current market rate is, and
mm,
I've seen that happen, at several shows
yeah,
recently.
yeah,
But that attitude is creating this adjustment, and it's created a new crop of kids. Sadly, I say sadly, they may not think that way. Their parents may not think that way. But when I was a kid growing up with this, I enjoyed collecting for collecting. I loved having the cards. My enjoyment didn't come from selling them; it came
mm,
from collecting them. And
yeah,
sure, I sold cards here or there to go buy other cards, and that's great. And that was a lot of great experiences. But I think a lot of kids today, they're getting more enjoyment out of selling the
the
card
money. It's the
than
money.
having it. Yeah, they
Yeah.
want the money. And
Yep.
so they see these things as a way to get money, like a stock would get you money or anything that you own, piece of. Um, and that worries me. I don't think there's as much longevity in that.
Mm,
It because the passion that I have, the 14-year-old me and Mount Kisco Cards and Collectibles, that's still here today, isn't here because I made money back then. It's here because I had cards I loved back then, and then I
yeah,
kept and I still keep and I
yeah,
still collect. And so that's kind of my kind of general worry of this whole kind of comp craze. I want to break that. I really want to kind of break that mentality. I'm going to do a video soon. I'm going to put it up on my Instagram. I bought a Kobe Bryant autographed card recently that was the exact same card that someone bought 3 weeks earlier on eBay. I bought it on eBay again. So the person who bought it put it up for sale again. I paid 50% over comps. of the exact same card 3 weeks later. So not a lot of time passing. Kobe's market didn't jump up
Yeah.
50% in those 3
Yep.
weeks, um, but the card was worth more than what that person paid 3 weeks earlier. And I believe it was worth more than what I even paid for it. Like the value that I had in my mind of that card was different. And I think we need to look at that again to start saying, would I rather have the card or the money? What is this card worth to me? What
Yeah.
money would I put out to own this as a collector? You know, and if we get back to that, that's when the hobby thrives. That's when
Yeah.
people are paying what they feel like they should pay,
Mhm.
and getting the cards they want to get for a price that's reasonable to them.
Well, it comes down to bringing the collectors back, right? I
Exactly.
mean, that 14-year-old kid and up to the 2000s, the 10s and stuff, most of the people coming to those shows were collectors. They were buying
Yes.
cards, they were putting them in their collection. Now what has happened since the COVID boom is it's all about money. It's a business. As
A lot of them
people
are.
are
Yep.
there. And I say this all the time. I just feel there's not enough collectors out there. When I see a card, when I PC in my PC, if I see a card and I identify this is the next card that I want to get. So when that card comes up, I usually, unless somebody's really, really over the top,
You're
I'm
gonna
just
get it.
I'm just buying it because
Yep.
you don't see the card that often. It finally popped up, and I just buy the card. This just happened a couple days ago. A card popped up, and I bought the card immediately, right away. Like I saw the card, I was excited. My wife said, "What is going on?" And I said, "I just bought this as a part of a set." And I just bought this card. I never thought I would see this card come up, and I just bought the card. And immediately the guy messaged me, and he said, "Did I sell that too cheap?"
Because
That's
you were
the
so
first
fast
thing
on
he
it.
said to me. He said, "I
Yep.
just put it up and you bought it immediately. Did I sell it too cheap? Could I have held out for more money?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you this. You sold that card to a collector, somebody who's excited about that card, and I'm never going to sell that card, right?"
Yeah.
So at least that made him feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know,
Uh,
isn't it funny though that that was his mentality immediately, not
yeah.
realizing that you have a saved search and this is something you've been looking for
Yep.
years,
Yep.
and that this is something that you really want and will be great in your collection. I have a card back here in one of my cases that's I can grab it actually. It's kind of special that I had a saved search for years. And when it came up, it was the same thing. Within minutes, I bought it. And the guy probably thought the same thing about it.
How exciting is that when that saves search and nothing when eBay pops up things and it's never the right thing. It's always
Right.
something different. But then when the card actually comes up, the heart
It's
starts
the
racing.
greatest thing ever. Yeah, no, totally. So this is
Oh,
the one that you're very familiar with, I'm sure. The first year of SPX, let me get a light that's closer here
yeah.
so I can actually
That's
show
the
it.
one that had the hollow, the
Yes.
you
So these have
you
the
had the
holograms in the background. Let me see if I
yeah,
can get a good light on this. Oh, there we go. You can see Jordan there smiling right right over there.
yeah,
So Jordan smiles in the background. He's wearing a black jersey. So this is the one that everyone knows that you're used to seeing.
yep,
But years earlier, I found out that this card existed. It was an error of the craziest type. Like, how does this even happen? It's like so. It's still the Jordan card. Still got Jordan on the back.
yeah.
Still the Jordan. But then
Oh, that's
you
not
look at
him
the
in the
hologram,
picture.
and the hologram is Jerry Stackhouse, who at the time was like the heir apparent. If you ask like people like who could be the next Jordan, that
Yeah.
year Jerry Stackhouse was at the top of the list. So the fact that this card exists with Jerry Stackhouse in the background hologram of the Michael Jordan card, there are only two that have ever been found and graded. And then there's one, the one that I originally saw was autographed by Jordan at the camp, which I thought was like, why would you take an error card that is so rare and then have Jordan sign right over Jerry Stackhouse's face? Like,
He's
but that's
probably like, that doesn't belong here. I'm gonna cover that one up.
I was like, what are we doing? Like, that's just poor judgment, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sorry to whoever did that. Like,
And
that was just poor
I'm
judgment.
just wondering if the person who had it signed knew that it was an error card.
They
Sometimes
somebody did along the way because it was up on eBay, I mean, over a decade ago, which is how I found out that the card even existed. And I was like, oh man, I need this card. What a weird error. Because this isn't like you just misprinted something or it's miscut or this is the hologram in the background of a die cut card. Like, how does this happen? Where you have the right back, the wrong hologram on the front, but the right front. Like how does that take
Yep.
place? Um, so that was one of those cases. Like I think it was maybe 12 minutes after the card went up on eBay. I bought it immediately. I bought both. The guy he had graded both at the same time, the regular and which is I love that pairing them out too. They're both 9.5 gem mints,
Yep.
but literally like ends in a 7.3, ends in a 7.4. Sent them in at the same time to get them graded.
So that
Um,
was a package deal for two of them. He put them
yeah,
both of them up together.
I
Wow.
I got them both together, and that
Yeah.
was a great price too at the time that I bought them for. I've been offered on just the Jordan $10,000, so on just the error one,
Yeah.
um, and they don't come up. They're just not around, and it's the highest graded one that's out there.
Yeah.
There's
And
one other graded one.
probably at this point, if somebody knew what they had, if there was another one and they knew it in this point in time,
You would have found it.
you would have seen it somewhere. Somebody would have posted it on some type of social media, things like that.
Yeah, and I looked for
Mhm.
years just to people that listed those Jordan cards just to see if there was a Jerry Stackhouse in the background of any of them. Like I tell you, like I had the saved search, but then I had my other search that I was daily going through. I obsessed over getting that card,
Yeah.
just because I thought it was such an interesting error. But yeah, like it stuff like that. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
But those things like on those kinds of cards, like you don't. It's hard to even tell what the value is,
Yeah.
and I think
Nor
it's so
nor do you
interesting.
care, right?
Right, like
Nor do you
right, 'cause
care.
again, it comes down to what are you willing to spend on it?
Yeah.
That's what true value is to begin with.
Yeah.
I see, kids today at these shows, I'd say I'll use the term kids loosely, people younger than me today at these shows, that freak out if they can't find a comp on something. Like, they don't know what to do, they don't have any frame of reference, and if you ask
Yeah.
them, like, "What is it worth to you?" They don't know. It's not
No.
worth to them anything. It's worth to
Yeah.
them if they think they can flip it, and if they don't have a comp to point to that they're getting underneath, then they feel like,
Yeah.
"Well, how am I gonna sell it? How am I gonna
And
rationalize what it's
and
worth
that's
to me?"
what they say too. They're like, "Well, how am I gonna sell this if I don't have a comp?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm selling it and I don't have a comp on it."
Yeah,
It's a low pop. I mean, there's only 4 of them. How often do you expect 4 cards in the world? There's only
right.
4 of these in the world. How often do you expect them to sell? Right? So, yeah, and they'll say, "Oh, well, let me do you a favor. You're asking 500. I'll give you 200 because I'll be lucky to get that with no
Oh,
comp."
yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll hold on to it.
Yeah, maybe I'll just keep that one for a little bit longer. Yeah.
But that is that is the single biggest change in the last few years. Look, people looked at eBay comps before, but it wasn't the be all end all.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to go back to that notion of like, here's one data point, here's one marketplace. Look,
Yeah.
eBay back in the late '90s, I joined eBay in 1998. Longtime eBay user. I've done influencer work for eBay actually as well. And they're like, you're the OG basketball guy on eBay. Like the amount of cards I bought on there and stuff, crazy. But back in the day, if I think back to 1998 when I was buying cards on eBay, eBay was the wholesale place. That's where you looked at that from a standpoint of like, here's a risky place that
Yeah.
I can buy a card that's not graded, that might be junk, might be fake, might be whatever. I'm going to pay for it with a money order because it wasn't PayPal then. I'm going to
Yeah.
pay for it with or credit card. I'm going to pay for it with a money order and then I'm going to hope or cash on delivery. Remember that
Yeah.
CODs back then like and I'm gonna get this thing. I'm taking a huge risk. And that's where you got discounted cards because you were taking that risk. And if you were the seller back then, you were just desperate to get cash for said cards that you had.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was a wholesale place. That's what any vendor, if you talk to them, if you had mentioned eBay, they'd go, "Oh yeah, that's a place I buy some cards in bulk and hope to score maybe one card out of a lot that's
Yeah.
actually halfway decent." Now, the fact that that's what's treated as the be all end all market for so many of these people in terms of value, it's befuddling. And if you talk to people at eBay, I think they feel the same way. Like there's a lot of pressure about why is that the value that gets attached. It's easy data, and eBay's made it easy to look things up. And now with their TerraPeak product, well, TerraPeak when they brought it on, and then now they still call it that, but like in seller tools and stuff, that they'll give you a way back look back on some stuff too. You've got things like Card Ladder that do a great job of even just image scanning it. My buddy John, over at I'm gonna blank on the name now, but like all of these card scanning tools, um, it's Center Stage. Like all these card scanning tools just make it so easy to get to that data because the data is easily available.
Yep.
And so I think it's lazy. I think is honestly where I'm at. A lot of these cards, especially the really tough ones, cards that are numbered out of 5 or cards with a very low pop. I mean, even a Gem Mint 10 card, you could have 3 Gem Mint 10 cards, and one of them is the best out of those 3.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying, right? Like,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
people,
If
the
you took
market
if you
looks
took
at
all 3 of those 10s and cracked them and sent them all back, 2 would
yep,
probably not come back 10s.
not come back at
Yeah.
10. And you
Yeah.
could look at them with your own 2 eyes, and you could have 5 different people line up and look at all 3 of them, and all 3 of them would pick the one same 10 as their favorite out of those 3. Like,
Yep.
there are just discrepancies within all of this stuff, and the fact that people take the attitude that they can look up a comp and make that the be all end all, it's wrong. It's just flat out wrong. A patch could be totally different on a card. I collect a lot of patch cards with the stitching and everything, not jerseys, but like the full out
Yeah.
patch cards. And they're all different. Every one of those is different.
Yeah.
And so you have to at least, and to me, like a nice patch on a card, I'll pay more than a crappy patch on a card.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't just
Or
comp.
multicolor versus just all one
Yeah.
color. Yeah, things like that.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's a data point. Look at the comps that you can find as one point, but then you branch off from there and you say, "Yeah, but this one is nicer. I'll pay more for that than this."
Yep.
That Kobe autograph I got, again, like I paid 50% more than the guy did 3 weeks ago for the exact same card,
Yeah.
because I know it's more valuable than that.
I
So
mean, and me as a dealer too, like I going out there and doing this, I've just turned to grading cards now. It's like it's tough just to go out, like you said, and buy a card because we're all looking at the same comp and we're all basing the percentages off of. So now I've just turned to grading cards and hopefully to find those percentages in getting a
yeah.
raw card and then having it graded. Yeah.
Trying to make it stand out. I mean, that's what people it's funny. My mom coined this term for me back when I started collecting. And so I had my dad's baseball cards, and my mom said, "Look, those cards are really limited. They've been putting, bike spokes over the years. They've been lost in collections, thrown out by parents who had them in the attic. Like there's been this natural decline of the amount of those cards that exist. So there's a real limitation." My mom said, "These card packs that you buy today, back in the 90s, where they have these inserts and these things," she goes, "those are artificial limitations." Like, and I love that phrase. She's like, "They put artificial limitations. You can only get one of these, one per box." So they're starting off by just making less of them to try and make them more valuable.
Yeah.
And now you look years later and you got one of ones, like the most extreme version.
Yeah.
We're only
Yeah.
going to make one. We're not going to wait for, all the other ones to not exist. It's just one of these to start with.
Yeah.
And it's true. And like we're in that new world now, and grading is that other step where you get, a card that maybe, let's say they made 1,000 of a particular card, but there's only 4 Gem Mint 10s. Well, now you've taken that card and you've exactly what you're saying. You've subsectioned that out into its own category,
Yep.
its own space, where you've artificially limited it more.
Yeah.
There could be other 10s if some of those
Yeah.
raws get graded in the future,
Mhm.
but right now there aren't. So
Yeah.
there's only 4.
And it's interesting because you can look at that. I mean, you can look through the years. You can go back to the 90s, right? And you look at cards that were graded in the 90s and you look at the population count on those, right? And you see, oh, look, this is like a Gem Mint 10, right? And
Right.
it sells for $6 or $7, right? And the pop count of it is maybe 300 or 400, right? But then you go to 2021 and you get a card where the pop count is like 10,000, right? And the card's selling for like $5,000. It's
Yeah,
it's
the Luka Doncic was that one, and I had his Prism rookie, and I called that out in, I think it was my first YouTube video for basketball cards back maybe 4 years ago. I was just starting to notice this spin up where that was going and how people were grading them, and it was, I bought those cards, those Prism Luca rookies, for 50 cents a piece on eBay. I had 2 of them. I bought for 50 cents a piece, and I sold mine for $20 a piece because that was a kind of the standard rate that they were going for at the Plainfield show in Connecticut. The guy who I sold them to wore Chief cards.
Yep.
He probably, he
Yeah,
went, he
good friends
graded
with him.
them, and he sold each one for $550 a piece. He got gem 10s on both of them. You look at that progression, and it's just so weird. And it was the point at which that was happening. I was like, this is not natural. This is too far. Like, and then when they went up to 2 grand and 3 grand for not even the refractor version, not even the prism, like just the base, it was like, no, no, something's gonna give here, and I called it. I said it's like a game of hot potato.
Yeah.
Everyone wins throughout the game. You're not a loser until you're the one stuck with the potato at the end of the music when the music ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know, and that's really what it's become. And
Yeah.
we've seen that again and again and
Yeah.
again with a lot
And
of
if
these.
and if you're like if you're a dealer, right? Sooner or later you get stuck with one of those hot potatoes, right?
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah.
And then you can make some potato soup, maybe some French fries, something,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
out you're
Can't
out a lot of money.
make soup out of Mac Jones, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh, that's funny. Um, so I know you have kids, and I
Yeah.
know I saw a video, right, of your daughter pulling a one of one.
Yes.
Was it a Luca card?
Yeah, it's actually
Um,
in the case here too. I'll grab it out.
and as you're getting it, I'll tell you, all these years in the hobby, all these years, the only one of one card I pulled about 3 weeks ago, and
Uh-huh.
it was a women's soccer player. Wow.
See if it focuses in there. But yeah, that was a
Yeah.
101 there on the back. Right down there.
Yeah.
There it is.
Nice. So are your kids into the hobby? Are they collecting? Do they have
My
PCs of their own?
my son collects Pokemon. He's all about that. My
Nice.
daughter she touches upon the Pokemon stuff. We opened a little bit of Lorcana. I think maybe
Oh,
she would get into that. Um, they both enjoy collecting. My son enjoys the Pokemon stuff a lot. Neither of them are particularly into sports. My daughter does like the WNBA stuff and the girls soccer stuff. She likes anything that the girls are in the sports. Like, so
excellent.
anytime I find that stuff, I've been buying it for her and putting it aside and giving her some stuff each day. And so
Mhm.
she's got a little card collection. But my son's like pretty serious about the Pokemon stuff, and he's got binders and binders full. He's got boxes top loaded. He's got a full drawer full of stuff at this point. A lot of folks had gifted him things early on, dating back, 6, 7 years ago, before Pokemon was in a like back into like huge popularity. People would see me at a show and they're like, "Oh, what's your son collecting?" I'm like, "Oh, he's into Pokemon," and they're like, "Oh, I got some extra Pokemon here." And so he's got some like really nice stuff from like their first editions and things that
Yep.
their initial stuff from the '90s that were just gifted to him, which I think is amazing. He could have an awesome basketball card collection if he was into that,
Yeah.
but he's not.
Yeah.
Maybe he
You have a
will be
great
someday.
mentor.
Yeah, right. Like I could totally do this. But that's the thing, like, as a dad, like, I would never pressure my kids into anything. Like, I want them to be themselves. I want them to be their, individual selves. Yes, I get a lot of passion out of this. My wife is not into cards in the least,
Mm.
and so, like, I would never force it upon another family member to be like, "You gotta do this. It's fun. You'll learn how fun it is."
Yeah.
Like, it's not natural. So,
Yeah. My
but they
my
do
wife
like
likes
going to.
my wife likes opening the packs, right? So and I
Yes.
get back a few years ago when I started opening up like Don Russ football, and I think she was probably on the fence. I'm like, "Come on, open up some packs." And then she pulled out a downtown card, right? And once they pull like a big card, it's
Now
like,
they're hooked.
"Okay, I'm good at this." Keep the packs coming and and I know how people can get hooked on it quick, right? Because it's exciting. You're opening these boxes and anything could be inside, right? A
Yeah.
one of one card, anything could be inside there. So yeah, it's a little gambling, but it's definitely exciting,
Well,
for
this was incredible because the Luca that she pulled, we had gotten a box, she picked a pack, and I had videoed this, which is incredible because it's on my Instagram, which you saw. Like,
Yeah.
she literally picked a pack. She goes, "This is my pack. This is the pack that I want." We opened that pack, and I could see the one of one stamp through the front of it. Like, it's down there. It's hard to see now.
Yeah.
If you have light behind it, you probably get it. But I could see the one of one in there, and that's when I freaked out because like I'm like, this is a weird color for the clear shots. I don't remember them being like a pink purple, which pink is like her favorite color. So it was so fitting that this was the one that she pulled, that the one of one would be the one in her favorite color. Luca, who we had talked about a lot right before that. It was incredible. We got offered money for it, and I was like, no, I mean, this is like it's a
Mhm.
one of one that she pulled, like
Yeah.
it's got
Yeah.
to stay in the collection.
It's a better memory than a card right now. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that's
Yeah.
so many of these, even if they're a cheap card, I always tell people like cards for me, they encapsulate whether it's like a memory of the player, whether it's a memory of like in this case, pulling the card itself, like having that event. It just
Yeah.
brings you back to something, brings you back to your childhood, like thinking about when you were collecting them, the situations around that. So I don't know, they're like little time machines, these cards. I like to say that as well.
Yeah. So last thing I'm gonna ask you about, is your Backstage pass collection. How is that going? I've heard you mention that before on
Yes.
some other
I got so
content.
I have to get back. So I made an Instagram for it. I think it's Backstage Collector is the Instagram name. And so for years I worked in the music industry. I was doing video production, promotion, and things like that for a lot of artists. Maroon 5, Jason Mraz, Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber. I mean, like you name it, like a lot of big time artists. I worked with, big radio concerts and stuff too, like the Jingle Ball tour in New York, Madison Square Garden. I was backstage doing those things. So I realized over time, like I was collecting, you get either a laminate. If you were on a tour for a long period of time, you get called laminates, like the plastic ones that are laminated. But in most cases, you would get a stick-on pass. Whoops, a stick-on pass that's like a uh how to best describe it? I have a few of them in the room, but like they're like a cloth pass that's printed on in color, but then you can write on it and stuff too. So those are the most common, and I started collecting them. Anytime I went backstage, I was somewhere like I kept the pass afterwards. They were usually dated. And then I started trading tour managers. If I had like an extra one, I would trade a tour manager from another tour that maybe had a pass from something that they worked on. And so over time, I amassed hundreds of these backstage passes. I think, and I don't want to create a market for this really because it's just not, I don't want to have to deal with it. But for as much as people are collecting tickets now to events,
Yep.
they make thousands and thousands of tickets. Like an event in Madison Square Garden, there's thousands of tickets at to that event. There are very few backstage passes.
Yeah.
And so
And
I
most
think
of
it's
them are
like,
digital, right? I mean, the
yeah,
tickets
most of the
now,
tickets today are digital. You have to
they're
really
all on my
you have to
phone.
ask.
I show up, scan my phone, and walk in. No, there's no paper tickets
I
anymore.
had buddies that came in from California to New York for Steph Curry's three-point record breaking game, and
Yep.
they had digital tickets, and they had to go to the box office and beg to get physical versions printed, of their
Oh,
tickets so that
would they do that? Would they print
they
them for
do.
them?
They do, yeah. Yep,
Wow.
if you're nice enough, they'll do it. And then my friends got them signed by Steph, months later, when they were back in
Oh,
California.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna have someone sign a digital ticket. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah,
But yes, I
sign my
think there is
phone.
yeah, I think there is that aspect though. You're right. Like they're more limited now, or at least they're looked at that way.
Mm.
Um, I think people are. I think there are a lot of tickets from the past that people might have in drawers and stuff, and they're saying they would get them graded. Um, but I think backstage passes are a whole other end. A ticket, like a Ticketmaster ticket, is very boring. Yes, it was at the event, or yes, it commemorates that. I get it, but backstage passes, like it's an art form. Like these are pieces of art that a band either hired an artist to do, or in some cases they did themselves. Like they came up with the artwork behind it.
Mm.
So it shows the band's personality. It shows more of the event. It shows a period in time, and they're all different. They're different colors, and a lot of times, like if a band goes on a tour, they'd have 5 or 10 different colored passes of the same pass because you didn't want someone from last night's show who had a backstage pass and you wanted there then coming back to tomorrow night's show when you don't want them there. You're already,
Yeah.
overbooked. So they had to do those in interesting ways. Um, but I was fascinated by them. And so I have a pretty large collection, like a few hundred between the ones that I got myself and other ones that I traded for
Yeah.
over the years. So I want to do that. Like I said, that backstage collector account. I want to put that on some of that stuff there. I think it would be cool to share
Yeah.
because it is
Yeah.
another collectible. It's like a card. You could encapsulate it. You could have them authenticated by PSA and stuff. I think Beckett's starting to do them now too. So you could do that similar to cards, but yeah, it is. I didn't even realize that you knew about that, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that I've really
Yeah.
loved.
I,
Um,
I I heard that, and you know why? Because you know what, I know you did a lot with music, and when
yeah,
I first met you, and you were talking about all these bands and stuff, and I was in
yeah,
awe. So when I was a kid growing up, I mean, one of the things we used to, any concert that came, we used to go to the concerts, right? But back then they would rip the ticket. Right when you'd
yep,
show up at the ticket, they would rip half the ticket, hand it back to you, and you'd go into the venue. So I have a number of, a good amount of those that I collected that I used to throw in scrapbooks just to
that's awesome.
remember
It's a good
more of the
memory.
concerts, right? So
Yep,
I also used to buy the T-shirts to it, so that my kids, all of a sudden one day started going through the closet like, "Oh my God, we need these." And they started pulling all the T-shirts out, and they still wear them to some of those T-shirts today. Like it
yep,
all of a sudden became a thing again today to wear these old, concert T-shirts from the 80s and 90s, right? So yeah, like little things like that, I really I latch on to, and I just think it's neat. I think the thought behind it, just holding on to those, and even if you couldn't get it graded, and even if they just stayed in a box or in a closet somewhere, it's still that memory, right? It's still,
totally.
you go back and you pull it out and you're like, oh, I remember. And you could probably reach into a box and pull one out, look what is on
Oh
it,
yeah,
and then remember that day. And that to me is the most, that's what it's all worth right there.
I have
That's where
one.
all the value is right there.
I have one in particular that, and it's funny because it was kind of a full circle thing. There was other events that the event itself was bigger, but like where like the stuff that happened in the event was bigger. But I think one of my favorite ones, I have a talent pass from the MTV VMAs, the Video Music Awards back in the day. And I was a guest at the VMAs of the band Simple Plan. It was a punk rock band that was doing really well, super
Yep.
popular. Um, I had become real good friends with the lead singer, and so he's like, "Why don't you come down? We'll get you a pass. Like we'll get you in through the zone." So it was them. Avril Lavigne was there. I ran into her, and then a few other people in this one particular event. But that meant a lot to me because when I was a kid, I wanted to work for MTV. I had friends that worked there. But that was kind of my dream job at the time, thinking about music and video production and all the stuff that I was into. So the idea that a band that I looked up to, that I didn't know for like the first 2 years of their existence until, I was doing a TV show and things like that around it. But the fact that they invited me as their guest to the VMAs and I have a pass from the MTV VMAs that I was at, like,
Mm.
it means a lot. Just again, in that psychological thing, like you pinch yourself, like, is this really happening?
Yeah. Yeah. Is this
Like
my
as a
life?
kid, that it was a dream.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible. I mean, same thing with Madison Square Garden. I remember when I was in high school dreaming about going to Jingle Ball at Z100's Jingle Ball with all these big artists, and I got lucky. I had pen palled a guy in the promotions department there over time who actually became part of the Elvis Duran in the Morning Show years later. But he got me advanced tickets. I got fourth row center tickets at the Garden for Jingle Ball one year. Incredible. Totally opened my eyes to like, this is an amazing way to experience a concert at the Garden so close.
Yeah.
And I just set my mind to it. I said, I want to be backstage here at some point. And so years later, as I was going through production and stuff, I worked my way up. I did some work at they did a pre-show at Hammerstein Ballroom, which is like across the street from the Garden. So they had artists there. I worked with like the Jonas Brothers and people like that at the time at that venue. And then finally earned enough trust and showed enough of my work that I've been doing to the head of publicity that she said, "Look, I'm going to let you back at the Garden this year. You're going to come backstage at the Garden to do the stuff." And so that's when like Lady Gaga was there and like all these
Yeah.
other people. Like that was Lady Gaga's first breakout year, like when her first single came out. And so getting to meet them and be backstage there at that legendary venue that as a kid, like I looked up to, other than MTV, I thought working for Z100 would be amazing too when I was a kid. And like so like they're inviting me back here to do my thing. Like I had an independent production that I was doing at the time. Like it was crazy, like to think about that they liked your work well enough that they'd invite you somewhere so like sacred.
Yeah.
But I feel like that with the basketball stuff now and the sports and
Yep.
I'm going to the Hall of Fame inductions every year and meeting these athletes there. And a
Mm.
friend of mine got me into the player party at that stuff. Like this stuff I never would have dreamt of, you
Yeah.
know. And even just the local shows. Like I've photo that's on my wall way back there. Me and Paul Pierce at the latest Chantilly show. That was from the two of us wearing shades. He and I share a birthday, which I didn't find out until I met him the third time. Crazy. But again, like
Yeah.
never would I have imagined that
Yep.
I would be able to meet these guys and not just meet them, but work with them, have them remember you, make a splash,
Yeah.
make an impact. And
Yep.
that's the coolest thing.
Be memorable. Just
Yeah.
just like everything else you do, right? In media and everything else, you're memorable, you
Key.
know?
That's the key.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for being here today, Jonathan.
Oh,
Tell
my pleasure.
everybody if they want to reach out to you, where they can see you. I know you've got a website, you've got some cards for sale. Tell them everything.
Yeah, basketballcardguy.com is my website, and Basketball Card Guy is my username on Instagram. Those are the two easiest ways to reach out to me. My email is on the website, but it's just John, Jon, at basketballcardguy.com. You can reach out there. Always happy to help fellow collectors if people are, trying to get in to find a particular card. If they're not sure what a card is worth, if they feel like they're getting ripped off, any of that kind of stuff, reach out. I'm more than happy to help. I answer every DM on Instagram. Despite the growing following, I'm very accessible on there. And I think it's important, like I do this stuff still as hobby first. I can't stress that enough. So while I do have some cards for sale on my website, it's just a very small fraction of my PC that I've like said to myself, all right, I can let a couple of things go here and there.
Yep.
The majority of my 500,000 card collection is still very much in my collection. and
Mm.
and it'll continue to be that way because that's where I get the enjoyment. So
Excellent. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you like what you hear, please like, definitely subscribe, and most importantly, tell a friend and spread the word. Until next time, be good to yourselves and everyone around you. Thanks, Jonathan.
thanks, Ken. Have a good one.
You too.